I'll now pass over to James. I hope you will enjoy the talk. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Thank you so much for being here. The human condition is defined by our interactions with other people. It is not defined by warfare. But warfare requires interactions with other people. So there's a virtuous circle here. If we are to understand where warfare will go in the future, and I mean the immediate future, next week and beyond, it's probably quite helpful to understand where warfare has come from today. As alluded to, a slightly different presentation, no PowerPoint. That usually gets a thumbs up, yeah? Thank you very much. But we have some interactive chess, and I'm going to be ably supported in a little bit of game of chess throughout today's presentation to show some principles of warfare as it moves on. I think you've got me for about 30, 35 minutes, and I'd love to take some questions at the end. But why am I here? I enjoyed looking at the First World War as a slice in history. Before that, in my army profession, I was into concepts and the future of warfare, and now I look after people strategy. Those things link together to make me question, why do we fight, how do we fight, and how will that play out in the next decades? We cannot lose sight of the fact of what's happening in Europe now, which is actually pretty close to our doorstep, and in the Middle East, and in the Pacific. And going back to my opening point, warfare is around us all the time in different parts, and that's probably what I'm going to explain at the end, just how different warfare looks to what is brilliantly represented in this museum, but is a very different view of warfare. In our species history, approximately 100,000 years ago, Neanderthals and sapiens lived side by side. It's very hard to be precise on the dates, but by 60,000 years ago, Neanderthals had all but gone. The species were differentiated, and Neanderthal was of different skull and pelvis size, broadly bigger and stronger, and the sapiens, us, was broadly smaller and lighter. Of the many differences, the cave paintings we find in Central Europe and Northern Africa of circa 60,000 are attributed to sapiens, not Neanderthals. And those sapiens made incredible paintings of hunting animals, gathering around fires, and family groupings. They portrayed their doctrine on a cave wall. They showed one generation to another how to hunt, and the Neanderthals didn't. So by explaining the social interactions of group dynamics of raising children and hunting, we are sapiens, not Neanderthals. This could be, and please forgive me, this is tangential, the first explanation of if you get your doctrine right and write it in a compelling way, you get to survive. Okay, it's going to be an interesting lecture, isn't it? So we are here because of that. But from then, there must have been a stage where sapiens overtook Neanderthals, and there was probably some disagreement, and there was probably some fighting. Let's have a look at how that would have played out on the chessboard. My beautiful volunteer. Yeah, you can see that. Sapien, Neanderthal. If we play a bit of chess, well, that made it really, really easy, okay? So I've won there, but is that warfare? I would say that's not warfare. I would say that is a disagreement. That's two people arguing. So let's say I bring a friend. You're being very kind to me. Still not warfare. Do we agree that's not warfare? That is two people bringing a friend having an argument. Still not warfare. So let's go back to the beginning. How does warfare emerge? If we have a bunch of people who are broadly organised in a confined space and they start playing, you're being tactical now. I like what you're doing. Yeah, okay. Yeah, he's trying now, isn't he? He's trying. Oh, all right. We're going to have an exchange. Fine. Right, I'm going to sneak here. But do you see some tactics emerge, didn't they? Individual pieces started understanding the game. I don't think that's warfare. Let's go back to the beginning. So I think warfare starts potentially 3,000 or 4,000 years ago when a king, and it was a king, said, I'm going to get some people to fight on my behalf. I will probably reward you for doing that. And you know what? Because I'm the king, I'm going to tell you how to do it. So now we have a set of warfare that could be Peloponnesian wars, could be pharaohs bashing each other, could be many things thousands of years ago, where actually someone is on a battlefield with a group of people and they've now transferred ownership. This person is not at risk, and he has put these people at risk, and there's a consequence. And I think that is the very, very beginning of warfare and the evolution of some doctrine. You've brought me so far. Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to go back there. Thank you very much. We're going to have some more chess in a minute. There's lots of chess, and I'm going to win it all, I promise you. I want to take you now from that step of what's probably 2,000-3,000 years ago to how we find ourselves today, and we're going to use the chess pieces to explain it. But before we go into warfare, let's not forget that as we fight wars, society changes. And if you look at the evolution of warfare, you pretty quickly march alongside it the evolution of our society. As things are needed in the war footing, more and more people are mobilised, which means more has to be done behind. We know the examples of manufacturing ammunition in the First and Second World War that had been a male profession became a female profession. But not only does that happen, but after those wars, the workforce doesn't go back, it remains. So the societal triggers that warfare gives us has shaped our society and every other society. One of my favourite examples of that, and I appreciate this is quite a bizarre, but please bear with me. In the First World War, my particular favourite, the medical aid stations were genuinely just behind the front line. And the medical aid stations were staffed with male surgeons and female nurses. And that was it. The male surgeon would serve in that position there for months on end. But in 1914 and 15, the female nurses were only allowed to serve 3 out of every 4 weeks, because for the sake of menstruation, they were sent back from the front line. For whatever reason, that meant we needed another 25% of female nurses to make up that quota. Park that thought. At the same time, the only wound dressing available to our casualties in the First World War was natural sponge. And people made a lot of money in the Mediterranean clearing natural sponge and selling it as a wound dressing. And if you had a horrific gaping wound, it was packed with natural sponge, bound to you, and you hoped you didn't get gangrene. Natural sponge started to run out, and a company in America said, we can make a synthetic version of this. A company called Kotex. And Kotex made a cotton white fibre absorbent pad to replace the natural sponge. And it was super absorbent of blood. Can you see where this is going? Female sanitary products were invented that day, and the nurses in the First World War, just on the trenches, saw, I know what that can do, and so was born sanitary products, which, for all the good reasons, allowed those nurses to now serve 4 weeks out of 4. And we kept more people alive because it was super absorbent, and it was not as rare supply as natural sponge. I think it's a wonderful example of how warfare changes society, because not only did that happen in our clearing stations, medical stations, that then went all the way back through Europe into America, and of course Kotex exists today and still makes those products. Fascinating dialogue and shapes our country and world. Let's go back to chess. So if we go back to a rag bag of combatants and a king and some players, let's put 2 more out front and let's think of what's the next thing to happen in warfare. Well, of course, someone says, I can move faster if you put me on top of a horse. And horse or cavalry actually changes warfare because it gives us range and speed. But it's expensive. And the skill of riding a horse initially was about movement. And with the invention of the stirrup, all of a sudden you could armour that person or give them things because the stirrup gave them that mobility. So now we've got a very different game. Now we have someone in control, still the king, some very sacrificial pawns, and some very expensive cavalry. But now let's have a look at the game we play. I think white's meant to move first, by the way, I forgot. Yeah, I was making up the rules as we go along. Attacking with cavalry up front. Very Prussian. Yeah, it's not a trap, don't worry. Yeah. So, brilliant illustration, thank you, Dean. Do you see how much the game has slowed down? Because we're all now thinking about what's going to happen. All of a sudden, now you've got pawns and cavalry, you've got to significantly think about what you're doing and play them in concert. We shouldn't forget that cavalry was exceptionally expensive and a huge resource burden for food and water. So you couldn't go far with your cavalry. It could go quickly, but then it had to come back and feed and to be sustained. And it was where the money was on the battlefield, and hence today in the army, still today and for the last couple of hundred years, the cavalry had that preeminence because it was expensive, where the infantry, not so much. So that takes us into sort of medieval warfare. Knights on horses, peasants with pikes, and a king. Let's go back to the beginning and think about what happens next. So I'm very proud to say that if you mix potassium nitrate, charcoal and sulfur, you produce gunpowder. And if you mix it in the right quantities and give it ignition under compression, you get a really big bang. And as a gunner, that makes me proud and deaf. So artillery comes to the battlefield. And then just like the chess game, all of a sudden, now I have range. But artillery, cutting edge of technology, expensive and fragile. Now I'm sure you know that the Royal Artillery used to have its own museum in Woolwich, where we had the Royal Arsenal, where a bunch of off-duty gunners 200 years ago said we could form a soccer team. What should we call it? Let's call it the Royal Arsenal. Let's just call it Arsenal. And they're still our football team. They do quite well for us nowadays. I don't follow them. But they still wear our cap badge on their chest, of course, and it is genuinely derived from the Royal Artillery football team at the Arsenal in Woolwich. I bet that's the thing you remember of all the whole day, isn't it? You're going to remember that now. But the important point is as well as making cannon there for the Royal Navy, hence it's on the dockside, and for the Army, is actually where we made our explosives from. And that's where the Royal Artillery and Royal Engineers grew up in Woolwich, making things go bang. So we now have these artillery pieces which are extremely fragile but very effective. The change to the battlefield is now a few people can impose themselves on a lot of people at some range. This to me, let's fill out the front line, is Napoleonic warfare. Wellesley and Napoleon would recognise the constituent pieces and the game they're playing. But let's think about the battlefield. For those of you who've been to Waterloo and stood on the big mound and looked at Hougoumont Farm, I appreciate that mound wasn't there originally, but lots of people think it was, ironically. You can broadly, apart from the farm, see the battlefield in one day at one place. And the Battle of Waterloo that shapes Europe was played out broadly in a day. You had to get there was mopping up, but broadly in a day. And it was commanded by a single person with a staff of 3 ADCs in a day. And where Wellesley and Napoleon placed their artillery, when the Prussians arrived from, what happened at Hougoumont, was still played out as warfare at the beginning of modern warfare age. Let's go for another quick few moves each and see what happens. Can you see again how the whole thing is slowed down? We're now, even though I'm saying let's get on with it, we're now trying to consider and not make it look too silly. We also have a more congested battlefield. There is more going on. The skill of Wellington at the time and Napoleon was absolutely understanding the ground, the land, and the dynamics of the day. When to advance, when to deliver the cavalry, and what the artillery could do for you in that fashion. The orchestration of that, in a Clausewitzian way, was the key skill that Napoleon had throughout his career, maybe got overconfident towards the end, and Wellesley understood from the Peninsula Plain through. We fought this style of warfare for maybe 150 years. Relatively simple artillery, firing direct, either cannon or grape shot, very short range. Fast and mobile cavalry, but very expensive, and lots of infantry forming squares in red tunics. But both sides of that campaign got really, really, really good at it, and we see the end of that effectively in 1914. When we arrive in 1914, it still looks like that. Let's go back to where we were. So the only thing that's happened in 1914 from Waterloo is due to the race to the sea and the mountains, the First World War, that front line across Flanders and down into Switzerland, we now have a front line that goes beyond a single battlefield. And consequently, this king or emperor is no longer a person of privilege, this is a person of military might. So we could say that is Hague. And the significant difference to us in the evolution of warfare now is the artillery is still pretty shoddy, the cavalry is still on horses, and the infantry is still pretty basic, but their headquarters have evolved to be able to manage warfare over a far bigger frontage. And now at every level of command, there are more headquarters. Not big. Hague's army staff in 1918 is broadly 16 people to run 5 armies. There are batmen and drivers, but the thinkers and planners is 16 people. Can I just assure you that's slightly smaller than we have nowadays, by a factor of 10, maybe 100. I mean, it is ridiculously small. But the military genius is still vested in Hague. And he has some people to help him with staff planning, but he can still impose his will. So what we've really seen is the scale of this battlefield has changed, but the complexity hasn't really changed. So what happens in the First War to make warfare different? Well, first, the mobilization of society. Sanitary pads, women in the workplace making shells, the change in society, the mass mobilization. But it's then the next piece comes to the battlefield, just one bishop. One bishop representing in 1914 the Royal Flying Corps. And the Royal Flying Corps bring to us that day no kinetic activity, but the ability to fly beyond the enemy, fly back and say, they're over here. And they become our first information surveillance and target acquisition reconnaissance asset, the first I-star asset. And if you thought the cavalry had range and the artillery had range, all of a sudden they can fly across the whole of the army back and forth. And people go, we should probably start shooting at them. And of course that gives birth to anti-aircraft artillery. More artillery, definitely a good thing. But now if we start playing quickly, we suddenly see big, bold moves. Thank you for letting me do that. I even jumped on, actually, that's the wrong move. But you see what I mean? All of a sudden, range changes. And actually, if we play a bit more, take my pawn, take the pawn. Take the pawn with the king, with the knight. Oh, yeah. Now the artillery can play at range and we can do things. Thank you, brilliantly done. He's not allowed to win. But all of a sudden, can you see the battlefield has just opened up because we have an aerial observation and we have artillery. In 1914, the artillery, the Royal Artillery, is firing Napoleonic, broad in front infantry at things it can see. By 1918, it has moved 5 miles back, our range increases, our howitzers are huge, and we're firing indirect overhead with observers, spotters, and we're accounting for rotation of the earth, wind, air density, speed, and we can do some brilliant trigonometry. And all of a sudden, we can call in fire where we can't see it and cause huge effect. The counter-battery battles of the First World War is in many respects what gives us that tactical advantage. It was driven by Sergeant Major Stan Tanner, a young Sergeant Major, quite young, 26, who inadvertently invents sound ranging and corrections. You'll have heard of the mathematics of sound ranging. You put out a line of speakers, you know exactly where they are, something goes bang, and you triangulate where the bang came from. Quite simple maths and physics. We had that in the First World War, and what he did, his job was to plot with Chinagraph and big things of the bang came from over there. Easy. His genius was when we fired back, we would miss. And then we'd have to work out where they are. And the spotter would say left a bit, right a bit, up it, down a bit. His genius was to go is, actually, we know they fired from there, and we know your bang went here. Well, that is 800 meters to the right and 300 meters down. So if I tell our guns, go left 800 meters and up 300 meters, you'll hit it next time. So he invents sound ranging and counter battery fire. And the Germans can't work out for a couple of months of how we can absolutely accurately, with one correction, we'd fire one gun, see what that is in comparison, and then fire 400. German enemy artillery gone. Like magic. Evolution of artillery tactics from Sergeant Major Stan Tanner, who I think is somewhere in this museum. I have seen him. So, not him himself, his record's in the account of that. So all of a sudden, can you see how we've expanded the range and the mass and the state of the headquarters? Let's go back to where we were. So we've gone to the end of the First World War, and we're now in 1917. At Cambrai in November. And of course, what's come to the battlefield then is the Land Ship Committee from the Royal Navy has allowed us to evolve our track-laying system to cross no man's land into what we know as the tank. Now, as I'm sure you know, a Royal Navy committee was given the task of how to bridge across the mud and the earth and shell craters, and they make a track-laying system. In the end, they can't lay it on the sides, and the base of the Mark I tank is designed to smooth the path so our infantry can advance. It is in 1916 that the Dreadnought order for the Royal Navy had been cancelled, and the Admiralty officers on our Landship Committee go, we've got 600 Navy 6-pound guns, we've got nothing to do with them, let's put them on this tank thing. So the first tanks have Royal Navy 6-pound guns because it got the Royal Navy out of hook for buying them before they built the ships. It's not designed to be there. It was a track-laying mobility platform, and the tanks go into battle with Royal Navy 6-pound guns. And all of a sudden, the evolution of warfare says, yeah, it makes good way, but this big bang is really quite helpful as well. A lovely happenstance of history, and thank you to the Royal Navy. But this, in 1917, now evolves into what we know from my previous lecture as combined arms warfare. We have brought the majority of elements to the battlefield, and even the aircraft from the Royal Air Force by the 1st of April 1918 is now dropping bombs, lighting things, and doing a little bit of aerial combat. We have got the majority of the warfare that we recognise today on the battlefield. We then have to take a huge jump forward to Vietnam until the next piece joins the battle broadly, which is the other bishop, the helicopter. The invention of the helicopter in actually the 50s, but in utility in the 60s, allows us initially to do mass casualty evacuation and also with air mobile infantry, put a lot of people down very quickly. And again, by using the third dimension, we have a very different battlefield. Of course, in Vietnam, we have fighter jets and dogfighting and OODA loops and Boyd, etc. But on the ground, we now have a whole new dimension. So let's think of the chess set as now 3 or 4 times as big. What's happened to the king? That military general now has now got staffs. We've invented G1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, the staff branches of people, information intelligence, operations, logistics, planning and training and communications, and we start to manufacture how we run a battle and an army. We've also taken a whole new approach to how we bring people in from society and train them, predicated really on the 1943 GI Bill from America that took its army from 100,000 to 2 million in the space of 2 years by saying, if you serve, when you finish, I'll give you a plot of land, I'll give you or your children education, and you'll get free medical and dental care. Something today's army might consider as a really good idea, but that's another part of my job. So now we have armies of hundreds of thousands of millions. And whilst the First World War had huge armies, they were broadly static. Now we have aircraft and aviation, we can fight in faraway places, and we can dynamically move around that battlefield. So we're missing one piece. And I think that piece broadly arrives on the battlefield, the Queen, in the year about 2000, and that represents cyber and digital warfare. Cyber and digital warfare, the ability to spoof, the ability to block or deny someone's communications, the ability to lie on press to make people think something's happened that's not. So we've gone from 3,000 years ago to maybe 10 years ago. We've now got every piece of the chess set playing. And cyber is that fascinating piece because cyber doesn't really play by the rules. Let's play the next round. After you. Yeah, I've won. Cyber doesn't know there's a chessboard. Cyber doesn't know the Queen can only move. So he was like, yeah, I'll just do this stuff. And who is cyber? Is cyber a combatant? If you are playing on a keyboard or doing cyber warfare, are you a combatant of war? You are physically removed, and you are not physically doing more than tap, 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 but you can lead to loss of life. It's fascinating that what's happening in Ukraine today, and what's driven by keyboard warriors moving drones through the air, dropping things onto people, is so remote and so easy to do, it has distanced us and challenged us on the Clausewitzian nature and character of war. Because if war is human endeavour and defined by us in conflict, what happens when you take us out of it? The other thing that's happened in warfare is we've gone a long way into deception and spoofing. Now, if we think of deception and spoofing of not only putting false advertising in our national newspapers in the First World War, or sending German soldiers letters from the UK via Germany to them to tell them of different advances and spreading disorder, it's also about deceiving the enemy into your intentions. Sir, could you help me with a quick card trick? Your name is?
Martin.
Martin. James, delighted to meet you. Can we see this from there? Right, can you shuffle my cards for me very, very quickly? I'm not a magician, I'm an army officer, okay? The chance of this working, yeah, the chances of this happening are pretty slim. Right, I have them back, Martin, thanks very much. It is just a normal promise you deck of cards. All I'm going to do is say, take a card, show it to everybody else, and I won't look at the screen either.
Or just show it to the people.
Oh, show it to the camera, yeah. Oh, I've got... Okay, sorry, so hang on, I want to put it on there like that. Can you now drop it onto one of the other 4 piles for me? And can you now pick another pile to move it onto? Just point to one. That one there, right, so we just slide your card on top, and we put that there, and we put that there. So deception is all about making your enemy believe you're somewhere you're not. Your card just goes in there. So the deception thing is, can we do that to a card? And is that your card? Yeah. You like that? Thank you very much. Thank you, Martin. It's really not that good, I promise you. But my point is if I can deceive Martin up front with a little card trick, imagine what I can do with some inflatable tanks or some inflatable artillery pieces, or even better, the perception of something that's not happening. We ran an experiment in 2016 with Royal Air Force image analysts. We gave them 12 pictures of Salisbury Plain training area, the same. We had a bunch of them and said, you have got 4 minutes to spot the tanks that are hidden on the pictures. Good image analysts. They did their work. They all broadly circled the same things and went, right, we've broadly got them. Here's the tanks. Fantastic. There were no tanks in any pictures. But because we had told them there was, and they knew broadly, they had found tanks. Spoofing deception. And I don't know if society and warfare in general has realised just how much that goes on today. Imagine saying, yeah, I've got to take this box now because I'm going to replace that big ISO container with this because it's exactly the same thing. Yeah, no, yeah, they're the same pager, absolutely the same pager. And someone in Israel has produced identically, packed with explosives and sent out to some of the bad people, and then that happened. That's deception. Now, it's espionage and everything. But that is now as much as our battlefield, the pre-war war, as what we've been doing on this piece. So, the next and final couple of steps. The next piece to enter the battlefield is the bottle top. Now, this does not reflect my drinking habits. It does a bit. But what is the bottle top and how does it move? So the bottle top could be the unmanned aerial system dropping a hand grenade. It could be the remote weapon station controlled by remote control, or it could be a cyborg with a weapon system. And in my chess analogy, we don't know how it moves. Now, I did the silly cyber thing earlier. We know that can do that. But what happens if we produce 400 small tank-like things that are remote controlled but can be autonomous? We haven't. How would that change warfare? Because my challenge to you is that is just round the corner. And then warfare might tip from a human endeavour into a machine endeavour. Produced by humans, sort of controlled by humans, but fought by themselves. That future, with artificial intelligence, is very close. And we don't know if that's a good or a bad thing, but it's very close. And I think the challenge to us as the future of warfare cohort is we don't know what it means for warfare when lives aren't sacrificed but machines are. Is that the same? Is that a thing that we can get our heads around? Now, of course, when we play the next game, I think it's the last run at it, okay, and we start playing, let's take those off. We must understand that the warfare today we're playing, after you, sir, looks a bit like this. We're no longer playing on a battlefield, are we? There isn't a battlefield. Everywhere is a battlefield. If you live in Kyiv right now, you're in the battlefield. If you are inside Russia, close to that border, you're in the battlefield. If you're in the Middle East, you're in the battlefield. And I think the genius of military commanders in the past up to this point has been about commanding, controlling a thing they understand and recognise and been trained to do with pieces they understand. But imagine what happens when you play off the battlefield. Imagine when you've got players stuck all over the wall, like a pawn on top over there, or a pawn on top of the projector, or a pawn down there that you haven't seen, or a pawn or a queen up there. I think that's all of them. There might be another one somewhere. And one up there, the pawn up there, yeah. When I've gone, let me know where I forgot, okay? Imagine now that not only is the battlefield so big, you don't even know where it is. And you don't know the players you're playing against and when they're going to strike. So, ladies and gentlemen, to sum up of my evolution of warfare, for all Western armies, and I dare say most armies now, we have some challenges ahead of us. What are the future pieces? How will they fight? And what does that mean to our laydown? So we're going to do one more quick game. We're going to take all the pieces off. So we've got to do this without looking at each other, okay? You're now allowed 10 pieces, any 10, and you've got to put them on your rows, and I'm going to pick my 10, and then we'll see what we come up with, okay? So you push yours to one side, I'm going to push mine to the other, and then we'll put them on the board together, okay? Right, so any 10. So this is us now, as military commanders or political commanders, saying, this is the army we're going to choose. You ready? You do yours, and I'll do mine. Okay, I can see where we're going with this. Right, you go. You lay yours out. I'll lay out mine. Brilliant. Because what we've got from a high-tech Western society is lots of cyber, some very expensive artillery, some long-range aircraft and helicopters. Brilliant. And it costs a fortune to make and train. And what I've got is thousands of individual soldiers who don't cost much. I've got many of and are quick to train and one person in charge. Who wins? No idea. But it's an interesting thought, isn't it? Because the evolution of warfare might be that, or it might be that, or it might be that, maybe a bit of that. But my last point is, we don't know where warfare is going. The contemporary lessons of Afghanistan, thankfully gone, and now Ukraine, are fascinating in mobilizing the population to become lethal, and also what it requires of us in terms of armament production and the will to fight. I'm not sure if you're aware of the stuff, and it's relatively well published, that when the Russian army invaded Ukraine, it was assumed a quick and easy victory. And it was assumed that if there was resistance, the Russian doctrine would carry out and they'd play through their vanguards and they would just go through and smash. The number of Russian units that stopped fighting and possibly went backwards and deserted was completely contrary to their doctrine and their psyche. They didn't believe that would happen. But the moral motivation was not there in Russian forces, and they stopped quickly and went back. What had been assumed as a warrior ethos and fighting to protect Mother Russia was not there, and you might suggest that Putin had forgotten that moral component. Conversely, a under-equipped, under-trained Ukrainian army full of citizen soldiers went, we understand our moral component, we're going to stand and fight to the last. And hence, sadly, after 2.5 years, we all will be our huge miscalculation by Russia, an underestimation of the Ukrainian people and the will to fight to defend their country. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you've enjoyed a little bit of chess. Thank you to my beautiful volunteer.